He trains Navy SEALs, my dad said proudly, gesturing to my brother in front of the packed country club banquet room. What does your daughter even do? He was scoffing at a retired 4-star admiral who had just asked about me. I sat silently at the end of the table, holding my glass while my father and brother laughed. For 10 years, my family believed I was just a low-level desk worker at a quiet defense firm. A total disappointment compared to their golden boy hero. But as my dad kept bragging, the old admiral stopped laughing. He slowly pushed his chair back, stood up straight, and turned toward me with a look of utter disbelief. His voice cracked with emotion as he came to attention and saluted me in front of everyone. Before my dad could even open his mouth to protest, the admiral looked him dead in the eye and said, "That's the woman who extracted my entire unit from Syria. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Emily Carter, and at 32 years old, I've spent over a decade existing as an invisible shadow in my own family's home. To my father, Richard, there was only one child who truly mattered, my younger brother, Jason. Jason was the absolute centerpiece of our family's pride, a hardened Navy SEAL who walked with an easy confidence and wore his service like a badge of royal honor. Every Snort's holiday dinner, every family gathering, and every casual conversation turned into an endless lecture about Jason's bravery, his intense physical conditioning, and the dangerous missions he undertook for our country. I, on the other hand, was the ultimate disappointment. As far as my father and brother were concerned, I was nothing more than an uninspiring office worker at a quiet defense consulting firm in Northern Virginia. Whenever the topic of my life came up, my dad would quickly brush it aside with a subtle shake of his head or a heavy, disappointed sigh. He saw me as weak, dull, and utterly unremarkable compared to his hero son. Over the years, I learned to keep my mouth shut, nod politely at every condescending remark, and silently endure the constant disrespect. I let them believe I was a failure because it was easier that way. But what my father and brother never realized was that the quiet girl sitting at the end of the dinner table was living a double life they couldn't even fathom. The truth was, I didn't work in some boring corporate cubicle. I was a senior operations coordinator for a specialized covert intelligence unit working directly alongside the Department of Defense and elite special operations commands. While my father spent his evenings bragging about Jason's training exercises, I was sitting in secure windowless rooms in Washington, tracking real-time satellite feeds, analyzing high-value tactical threats, and directing critical extraction assets in some of the most hostile regions on Earth. My job wasn't just to look at data, it was to keep ground teams alive when everything went wrong. Keeping that secret was the hardest part of my life. Because of the extreme classification level of my work, I had signed strict non-disclosure agreements that carried severe federal penalties if violated. I couldn't come home after a grueling 36-hour shift and tell my family how I had just guided a stranded strike team through an active war zone. I couldn't explain why my phone rang at 3 a.m. with scrambled, encrypted lines. Instead, I took the insult. I let my brother treat me like a delicate civilian who couldn't handle real-world pressure. I let my father look at me with pity, believing I was wasting my life away behind a screen. The isolation was suffocating at times, but I held on to a strict personal vow. National security and the lives of the men and women on the ground mattered far more than my family's validation. Little did I know, the truth wouldn't stay hidden forever. The breaking point arrived on a crisp autumn evening at a high-end military veteran charity gala held in our hometown. It Snorts was an exclusive event hosted in the grand ballroom of a local country club designed to honor local active duty service members and decorated veterans. Naturally, my father was in his absolute element. He had spent weeks making sure everyone knew his son, the elite Navy SEAL, would be attending as an honored guest. From the moment we walked through the heavy mahogany doors, my dad paraded Jason around the room like a prized trophy, introducing him to local politicians, wealthy donors, and retired officers. Jason soaked up every second of the attention, standing tall in his formal uniform, while my dad puffed out his chest with insufferable pride. And then there was me. My father had made it glaringly obvious that my invitation was nothing more than an afterthought, a pity gesture to avoid leaving me home alone. As we navigated the crowded ballroom, whenever an acquaintance politely asked about my life, my dad wouldn't even give me the chance to speak. He would wave a dismissive hand, scoff quietly, and say, "Oh, Emily just does basic office work for a government contractor. Nothing exciting like her brother." I sat quietly at our designated table near the front, sipping my water and enduring the constant patronizing glances. I watched my brother accept handshakes and toasts, completely content to play along while our father treated me like an invisible ghost. But the atmosphere in that room was about to change drastically. As the main dinner service wound down, a sudden hush rippled through our side of the ballroom. A distinguished silver-haired man in a crisp dress uniform entered the room, accompanied by a small entourage of high-ranking military officials. It was retired four-star Admiral Harrison, a legendary figure in intelligence and joint special operations. My father nearly knocked his chair over in his eagerness to stand up. Sensing a golden opportunity to climb the social ladder, he waved Admiral Harrison toward our table with an overeager smile. Jason immediately stood at sharp attention, straightening his uniform and preparing to make an impression on one of the most respected military leaders in recent history. The Admiral approached our table with a polite, measured step, extending a hand toward Jason. "Good evening, son. I hear you're with the teams," the Admiral said, acknowledging my brother's service with a brief, respectful nod. My father couldn't contain his arrogance for a single second longer. He leaned in, practically shoving himself into the Admiral's field of view. "He certainly is, Admiral. My boy trains Navy SEALs. He's the real deal." Admiral Harrison smiled politely, but as his eyes swept past my brother, they landed directly on me. He stopped mid-sentence, his brow furrowed slightly, and a spark of intense recognition flashed across his eyes. He bypassed my father entirely, looking at me with a mix of awe and complete surprise. "Wait a moment," the Admiral said, his voice lowering with genuine curiosity. "Who is this young lady?" My dad let out a loud, condescending laugh. "Oh, that's just my daughter, Emily. She does basic desk work. What does your daughter even do?" The words hung in the air like a heavy, toxic cloud, but Admiral Harrison didn't laugh. His warm smile vanished instantly. The silence that fell over the table was absolute. The smirk completely faded from my father's face as Admiral Harrison ignored him, taking a slow, deliberate step toward me. The retired four-star Admiral came to rigid attention, squared his shoulders, and delivered a crisp, formal salute directly to me in front of the entire crowded room. My father's jaw dropped in sheer confusion, and Jason stood frozen, staring at the scene in absolute disbelief. Guests at surrounding tables turned in their seats, whispering as the room realized a high-ranking military legend was standing at attention for an unknown young woman sitting in a simple evening dress. "Admiral," I said softly, standing up and offering a respectful nod. "It's an honor to see you again." The Admiral lowered his hand, his eyes shining with deep, raw emotion. He turned slowly toward my father, his voice cracking slightly with intense gravity. "You asked what your daughter does, sir. Let me educate you." He looked back at the room, speaking loud enough for every nearby officer and donor to hear. 3 years ago, my command unit was ambushed in an unacknowledged sector in northern Syria. We were pinned down, outnumbered, and taking heavy fire. The tactical operations desk that coordinated our satellite feeds, overrode foreign air defenses, and guided the dark side extraction team out of that death trap was run by your daughter. He looked my father dead in the eye. "Emily didn't just sit behind a screen, sir. She made the call that brought my men and me home alive. She is the finest tactical mind I have ever had the privilege of working with." The smug, arrogant atmosphere that had surrounded our table all evening completely collapsed into total, suffocating stillness. My father's face drained of every ounce of color, turning a ghost-like pale as the weight of the Admiral's words hit him like a physical blow. He stood there with his mouth slightly open, looking back and forth between me and the 4-star military legend standing in front of us. He was utterly paralyzed with overwhelming shame and humiliation. Realizing that in his desperate attempt to boast, he had publicly humiliated himself and exposed how horribly he had misjudged his own daughter, beside him, Jason looked as if his entire world had been flipped upside down. As an active duty SEAL, he knew better than anyone what a dark sight Syrian extraction meant. He understood the elite clearance, the cold nerve, and the immense responsibility required to pull off an operation of that scale. The patronizing, protective look in his eyes vanished, replaced by a profound, stunned awe. Snorts. He looked at me, not as a helpless civilian sister, but as a legendary operative who worked in shadows he couldn't even access. I calmly placed my napkin on the table and stood up, looking my father directly in the eyes. The quiet, timid girl he thought he knew was gone. "I never needed your praise, Dad," I said quietly, my voice perfectly steady in the silent ballroom. "I just needed you to respect me." Without waiting for his response or giving him the chance to stumble through an apology, I offered Admiral Harrison a final polite nod and turned away, walking out of the gala with my head held high and my dignity entirely intact. Walking out of that ballroom into the cool night air felt like taking my very first real breath in 10 years. In the months following that night, everything in my family dynamic shifted permanently. My father tried calling me dozens of times, leaving long, emotional voicemail messages, begging for forgiveness and attempting to make up for a decade of neglect. But I didn't need his sudden validation anymore. My brother Jason reached out as well, no longer talking down to me, but speaking to me with genuine respect as an equal in service. Today, I still carry out my work in the shadows, coordinating critical operations and keeping brave men and women safe across the globe. Establishing my own boundaries gave me a quiet strength that no family title or public medal could ever offer. I learned that true value doesn't come from bragging at dinner tables or chasing approval from those who refuse to see your worth. It comes from knowing who you are when no one else is watching. Now, I want to ask all of you listening to my story, would you have kept your secret for 10 years like I did to protect your career, or would you have set your family straight much sooner? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. I'm leaving 2 more incredible, mind-blowing stories on the screen right now that I know you'll love. Click 1 to keep watching.